Great. Hi, David. Thanks for joining. And I'll just start. If you could just start by introducing yourself, saying who you are.
Yeah, sure. My name's David Nicholson. I'm the Chief Climate Officer of Mercy Corps. Mercy Corps is a global humanitarian and development organization that supports communities in responding to all kinds of crises with a sort of particular and growing focus on the climate crisis as it unfolds globally.
Great. And you at if you hear noise, it's because you're down at COP30, and you have been there all week. Is that correct?
Yes. So we have a delegation of 4 people here this week, and I arrived early on Monday, so I'm sort of into my 4th day.
Great. And what's your experience so far of it, and what's your feelings? And is this your first COP, by the way?
Not my first COP, no. This is my 4th in a row. So my first with a sort of a serious mobilization with Mercy Corps was in Sharm el Sheikh. So this is the 4th time that we've come with a full team of policy specialists plus program representatives from our global platform. And we've sort of engaged more and more as the conversations have shifted a little bit more towards adaptation and resilience and raising the voices of some of the least developed countries that are really experiencing the climate crisis firsthand. So it's been, these things are busy and chaotic and often quite confusing. So it takes a few days to get into the rhythm of things. It's an incredible event to organize, and there's thousands and thousands of people here. And COP sort of organizes into 2 parallel universes, really. There's the negotiations that are trying to reach agreement around a prescribed set of policy outcomes, and then there's sort of the knowledge sharing and engagement platform that happens around it, which is more like a conference and partnership building event. And these things try and influence one another. So I've been sort of trying to keep a little bit of hand in both. Mercy Corps brings some through our program called the Zurich Climate Resilience Alliance. We have professionals who sort of track the negotiations really deeply, and they're monitoring various sessions throughout the day. And I'm monitoring that and engaging, as well as trying to meet with lots of partners and funders and government ministers, and trying to sort of share what we've learned and push for certain policy and positions that we're hoping to see advance throughout the next 2 weeks.
And do you get any feeling of the vibe of the atmosphere? Do you speak to other people, and you normally at the COP it almost becomes perceived very negatively, and it's going the wrong direction or it's going the right direction. You pick up any of the atmosphere? What is your vibe? What's your feelings?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very easy to be cynical about these events. It's very easy to question whether thousands of people need to fly around the world to all meet in a place on this. And yet, we're always a little bit disappointed that things don't go as far as we like. At the same time, it's given the number of interests and stakeholders here, it really is incredible the progress is made each year. It's too slow, it's too incremental, but I do think as you look back at the arc of COPs, that there has been steady progress, some years more than others. So I try to not take home with too much that negative mindset. And I will say the vibe so far of this one has been very positive. But I think the Brazil presidency did a really good job of framing this as what they call the implementation COP, recognizing that lots of the national determined contributions, these are country level plans that outline both how countries will reduce their emissions and also what they will do to try and adapt to climate change. Those have all been due this year, and a lot are in, some are being finalized. But that really puts the emphasis then on sort of the execution, the implementation. What are we going to do? And that's a much more constructive space, I find. And there's a lot of momentum and excitement around let's get to work, implementing these and sharing ideas and figuring out how to do that. So there is some positive energy around some of that. There's also, I was a little skeptical initially, as I'm sure many were, about hosting an event like this essentially in the Amazon, right? Which is a real serious sized city, but it is hard to get to. It's in the Amazon, and there's obviously some questions around that. But the proximity to one of the most important ecosystems, if not the most important ecosystem for climate action, has really brought a lot of that flavour in. You can feel that proximity. There's lots of actors from indigenous communities here. It brings a certain tangible vibe to the discussions around tropical forest protection and reforestation, ecosystem protection is quite a central part of this COP. Of course, there are lots of sticking points. There's already growing frustration among some of the least developed country groups and some of the developing country groups around certain agenda items, and a lot of growing pressure on the wealthier nations to get serious about paying up and meeting their legal obligations. That will continue throughout the next 10 days for sure, and will lead to frustrations on all sides, I'm sure, as we get through. But overall, at this point in the process, I'm feeling pretty positive.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on some interesting things there. That is in the middle of the it's a very the proximity to the Amazon jungle, and there's obviously been some development to host this event that has been perceived quite poorly. But then there's also other argument that the fact that you are so close to nature, it brings a bit close to heart. Is that something you felt as well?
Yeah, it absolutely is true. And of course, there's development anywhere may come at the cost of nature, and certainly doing it in the Amazon. But in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively small. And I do think, I know it was important for the president of Brazil to want to host this, really adjacent to, and even at times it feels like this city is within the Amazon, and bringing that very real sort of that real sense into the room, into the discussions. Very hard to make a value judgment on whether that was the right idea or not, but I can understand the sentiment, and I can certainly feel you can feel its presence for sure.
And do you so just briefly on your own organization and yourself, what is do you have some clear objectives by coming there? What do you try? What do you as an organization try to achieve? And also, what do your organization want to see happening overall when the summit ends?
Yeah, so Mercy Corps is here as part of the sort of civil society group that aims to track and monitor negotiations and to try and influence them where we can. And we do that in a few ways. We certainly come here with some of our program representatives. This week we've got colleagues from Indonesia and Kenya here. We've got another colleague from the Caribbean joining next week. To speak really firsthand from the recent impacts of the hurricane in the Caribbean. So we try and bring those program experiences and a platform of what works. We're trying to be a positive actor and say, we do have a lot of the solutions to adaptation and resilience building in the global south, and also to the co-benefits where we can achieve emission reductions and adaptation together. So we want to bring those to the table, and try and, through one-on-one meetings, through forums and gatherings, and then sort of discussions with negotiators, bring those lessons to bear and try and advance what is sort of the ultimate goal for us, as it is in many COPs, is increasing the amount of financing available. And this is a regular theme of COPs, and certainly of our engagement. We've been quite consistent in our analyses that we published over the years, and our advocacy that says that the developed country grouping has not provided enough finance, particularly the kinds of financing needed for the global south. One of our big objectives for this time is to see a new target, a new commitment agreed for adaptation financing. There was a previous target of adaptation financing that expired last year. This COP, there is discussions around what's called the global goal of adaptation. It's trying to put together a global framework for adaptation, a set of indicators, and sort of a more clarity on what the global action around adaptation should look like. Within that, we're really hoping to see a specific target of an amount of money, and the time frame and where the money will come from, to be agreed to and committed in line with the legal obligations of those countries that have caused the climate crisis. This will be really challenging. This is a very sticky issue, and we may not get all the way to an agreement and a full commitment of this COP. But that's certainly what we're moving towards. And a lot of what I've noticed so far, and what I hear from my colleagues that are in the solution meetings, is that the least developed country group and the broader developed country groups are really aligned and very consistent in their messaging that this is a high priority, and they need this to rebuild some trust that's been eroded over recent years to ensure that these kind of negotiations can continue to make progress. So we're hopeful there will be some momentum there. That is part of the larger climate finance conversation, which, as you'll remember, at COP29 we reached there was an agreed commitment of $300 billion a year for climate finance. we and many others think that is insufficient. The target of 1.2 trillion is the goal that's been sort of coalesced around as something we should be targeting. And there's been a lot of work on trying to get a roadmap. It's called the Backward Development Roadmap. We're trying to get to agreement. Okay, how do we get to that sort of true number of 1.2 trillion a year? What sort of mix of financing options are available to us at a global level to get to that top number? And the final thing I'll say is something that's really important that we've seen, and I think a lot of our peer organizations would agree, is in ensuring that a substantial proportion of this money, whether it's the adaptation finance or the broader finance goals, that's available to developing countries is in the form of public finance, in grant capital. Too much climate finance today has been in the form of debt, of various instruments that will increase the debt load of nations who are already carrying a lot of debt. And that's, I think, probably clear to anyone listening that that's just an unreasonable outcome of something that many discussions before. So we're hoping to continue to put pressure on public finance institutions to say, yes, we will support private investment into climate action. We know the need to crowd in private capital. It's absolutely essential. And we need to maximize and continue to increase that amount of public financing available to ensure that we're not saddling countries with debt.
Yeah, so obviously climate adaptation has a bit of it's hard to live up to or be treated equally to the point of mitigation, especially in terms of NDC and emission goals, and now the reports coming out overshooting 2 degrees and so on. How do you feel that the climate? Well, obviously we had like Hurricane Melissa just coming up to the COP, and those extreme weather events are becoming more and more frequent, hitting the poorest people in the world the hardest. Do you feel that there's coming a renewed focus and effort on the climate adaptation agenda and also channel those crucial climate finance targets?
Yes, and there's no question that the sort of the visibility of the adaptation issue has been increasing sort of over the last 4 or 5 COPs, no question, and it's very present in many discussions and events I've been involved in so far. There is sort of a new focus on private capital in adaptation. I think a lot of the financial mechanisms and private financiers of various stripes are coming around to this sort of necessity of financing adaptation scale, even for their own businesses and the investments they're making, as well as trying to find new sort of investable assets within the adaptation solution set. So there's a private push around adaptation, and there is just also a more broader recognition that there's no question that we're seeing increasing extreme weather events that are costing a huge amount of money as well as human life, and that we need to be finding as many ways as possible to build the adaptive capacity of various country systems to reduce the negative impact of those extreme events. Now, it's not on equal footing with the mitigation conversations yet, and of course the decarbonisation agenda is absolutely essential. This cannot be an either-or discussion. We have to be able to do both. There is a lot of momentum in certain areas of the decarbonisation agenda, and we're seeing energy transition investment in clean energy grow at scale. That needs continued focus from regulatory entities globally. We need continued focus from public financing and moving around public financing, and also the adaptation and loss and damage need to be there. So this is a broad range of solutions, and we have to be able to do it all at once.
Yeah, and quickly, just before we finish, we can't really get around that the UN obviously not present at the talks, and they're pulling out of the whole UN climate process, and they historically have been, well, obviously not supplying enough finance, but there have been a huge share of the climate finance. How devastating and how impactful is it to US not to supply any kind of climate financing anymore?
I mean, listen, it's having the largest economy and what I think is now the second largest contributor to greenhouse gases globally not present at an event like this is, of course, a major loss. US leadership has at certain points across the last couple of decades been really important in bringing food access to the table. So there's no question that it would be better with the US engagement. At the same time, many other nations are stepping up and taking on leadership roles. It's been an interesting evolution to see a lot of the what we might call middle-income countries really stepping up and providing leadership. China is very present, and Indonesia, of course, Brazil is the host nation, India and others are very, very active participants, both in negotiations and in kind of the sharing of solutions. And the world has to continue. And, I'm sure the political views on climate change will continue to evolve in the US in the future, and maybe at some point the US will be back at the table. But in the meantime, we have to accept that they're not participating and continue, and other countries will step in and take the opportunity to become leaders and also, become the drivers of certain solutions that the world needs.
Yeah. So do you have any intel on the progress in the climate adaptation finance, and when we could expect to see something land at the COP30 that could be tangible? Are you completely in the dark on that?
Yeah, we're not even finished week one yet, and there's still debates going on about what the actual agenda for the meeting is. So a little bit hard to predict. We have seen an initial draft of the Global Goal of Adaptation that has included a climate finance commitment with actual figures attached. I'm positive that it's in there. We know there's a lot of advocacy from many nations to keep that in there. My colleagues who track this stuff in real depth that are in and out of the rooms are skeptical it will survive because there's quite a lot of opposition to it as well. So we will see. But certainly at the moment, there is text in climate agreements or draft agreements that shows at least a willingness to try and get there. So we're optimistic. Even if we don't get to that commitment language that we're after, I think it's inevitable coming out of this that the focus on adaptation will only have grown, and we'll see what sort of the cover decision, sort of the note provided by the presidency addresses, and we'll be hopeful that there'll be some commentary and some marching orders on adaptation to maintain some momentum throughout the year, because COP is only a single milestone in efforts that go on all year round, and hopefully that will give renewed energy on the adaptation finance question as we continue throughout the rest of this year.
Really great to hear your insights, David, and I'll let you get back to the conference. Where can people find out more about you and the climate work that your organization is doing?
So you can certainly find Mercy Corps trying to share on our social media presence what we're doing here. So you can look at the various social platforms and find that there. It's probably the best place for it. And I'm trying to share my insights throughout the week on LinkedIn as well.
Brilliant. All right. Perhaps we can catch up later towards at the end of the conference or when you're back in the US. But thanks for taking time to speak to us, and enjoy the last bit of your time there.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.